Viewer discretion is advised. This series covers real events involving violence, crime and strong language that some viewers may find distressing. The content is intended for mature audiences. Please proceed with caution. Hello and welcome back to London's Dark Archives. In this episode, let's pick up from where we left episode 1. The Kray twins have been building a reputation in Bethnal Green. Now reaching their teenage years, they begin to build power throughout the East End. The story of the Kray twins' rise to power in East London is one of grit, violence and clever manoeuvring. But their path to becoming the rulers of London's criminal underworld didn't happen overnight. Before they were feared and respected across the city, they had to build a reputation, brick by brick, crime by crime. Now let's take a step back to the late 1940s, to when the twins first started making waves in the neighbourhood. Ronnie and Reggie Kray left school in December 1948, barely 15 years old, and quickly found themselves drawn to the streets of East London. Though they had ideas about entering the building trade, their ambitions never quite aligned with the straight and narrow. For a short time they worked as labourers for a roofer, but even then their minds was elsewhere. In January 1949 they took on what would become their longest legitimate job, working at Billingsgate Fish Market, earning just £2 a week thanks to their Uncle Joe. But it weren't the cold mornings and back-breaking work of unloading fish that kept them going. Instead, the twins would bide in their time, learn the ropes of East London life and soaking up the atmosphere of the streets, pubs and alleyways that had become their domain. In 1952, like many young men of their age, the Krays were called up for national service. They were sent to serve theirs with the Royal Fusiliers. The army weren't exactly their calling, and almost immediately they deserted, unwilling to submit to military discipline. Over the next few months, they was repeatedly recaptured and arrested, but each time they found a way to escape, often resorting to violence. Their most infamous act come when they assaulted a police officer who tried to apprehend them during one of their escapes. The assault landed them in the Tower of London, making them among the last prisoners to be held there. From there they were sent to Shipton Mallet military prison and later transferred to Canterbury, where the defiance continued. They assaulted guards, threw tantrums and caused mayhem until they were finally dishonourably discharged from the army. This was the moment when the Krays truly broke away from any pretense of a legitimate life. Their criminal records and dishonourable discharge meant their dreams of boxing glory was over, and with it, any chance of fitting into society. Once out of the army, Ronnie and Reggie found themselves back in the East End, now with reputations as tough, rebellious and dangerous. By 1953, they was already getting involved in street fights and protection rackets, starting small but aiming high. It was during this period they began visiting the Regal Billiard Hall, a run-down establishment in Eric Street, Mile End. It was a place where small-time gangs gathered, fights broke out and the manager struggled to keep the peace. The Regal was unloved and unpainted, and its reputation weren't much better, but the twins see potential in it. After a few meetings, they were offered £5 a week by the manager to manage the hall and keep the peace. By 1954, aged just 20 years old, the twins become the legal tenants of the Regal Billiard Hall. This was their first significant career move. The hall may have been run down when they took it over, but Reggie set to work refurbishing it, turning it into something more respectable. It weren't just a business to them, it became their headquarters, the base on which they would build their empire. Now while Reggie focused on the renovation, Ronnie's role was more forceful. Violence in the area, especially from rival gangs, quickly stopped. The twins' reputation as men not to be trifled with soon grew. The Regal weren't just a billiard hall, it was a meeting place for East End criminals, a storehouse for stolen goods and weapons, and the heart of the twins' early operations. The early gang, which would later become the firm, started to take shape around this time. They brought in Dickie Morgan, a known East End villain who had been involved in various illegal activities, and Pat Connolly, an old friend from their teenage years, who was as loyal as he was useful in introducing them to more experienced criminals. The Wentworth Arms, a pub just down the road from the Regal, also become a regular haunt for the Krays and their growing circle of associates. It was in places like these that deals were struck, favours called in, and friendships or alliances was formed. At this point, the twins' older brother Charlie weren't deeply involved in the operations. Unlike his younger brothers, Charlie had tried to keep his life legitimate for as long as he could. He worked various jobs, driving a cab, working as a labourer, even dabbling in boxing, but nothing stuck for long. While Ronnie and Reggie were slowly turning the Regal into a nerve centre of their operation, Charlie was still on the periphery, aware of what they were doing, but not yet fully committed. His entry into their criminal empire would come later, but for now, he remained a background figure, dipping in and out when needed. By 1956, the Krays were firmly established in East London's criminal world. Their protection rackets were spreading, and the firm was growing both in numbers and power, but it weren't without competition. Around this time, a Maltese gang tried to muscle in on their turf. The Maltese had been running their own protection rackets in the area, but they had underestimated the Krays. Ronnie, ever the enforcer, dealt with them in a way that left no room for doubt. He used a cutlass to cut down one of the gang members who had tried to extort money from him. The message was clear: the Krays weren't to be challenged. This incident cemented their growing reputation. Word spread quickly, and soon enough, the Krays were regarded as a dominant force in the East End. People in the area knew if you had business, legal or illegal, you had to deal with the twins. As the 1950s drew to a close, the Krays were no longer just two rough and ready gangsters trying to make their way in the East End. They was businessmen. Dangerous ones, but businessmen nonetheless. And while Ronnie was temporarily locked away in prison for assault, Reggie and Charlie see an opportunity to expand their empire beyond just protection rackets and street brawls. In 1957, Reggie acquired a new venture, and it weren't another biddiddle. No, this was something different. Something that would allow the Krays to blend their rising fame with their criminal ambitions. Enter the Double R Club, located at 145 Bow Road. The club's name was a tribute to the twins, Double R for Ronnie and Reggie. And it was more than just a place to drink or dance. It was a bold attempt by Reggie and Charlie to bring the glamour of the West End into the East End, to offer the locals something more upscale, more exciting than they'd ever seen. It weren't just a place for rough and tumble gangsters either. Celebrities like Barbara Windsor, Jackie Collins and George Sewell would rub shoulders with the Krays' local associates. The building was in need of work when Reggie first took it over. It required repairs and redecoration, but that was hardly an issue for the twins, whose growing network ensured they had both the means and the connections to get things done. By the time it opened its doors on Wednesday, the 6th of May 1957, it was transformed into something the East End had never seen before, complete with live music, a jukebox, and even a boxing gym and ring upstairs. The Double R Club became the latest symbol of the Krays' power and status. It wasn't just about money or violence anymore, it was about influence, the ability to control not just the streets but the social scene too. The club attracted a diverse clientele, celebrities, locals and other gangsters. Of course it weren't all smooth sailing. After his release from prison, Ronnie returned to the club and he'd mark it by a notorious incident that further cemented the legend of the Krays. Never one to keep things low key, Ronnie allegedly brought a donkey and dwarves into the club as part of a peculiar stunt. Whether it was meant as a joke or as a sign of eccentricity, it didn't quite have the effect he'd hoped. Instead, it unnerved the clientele and the atmosphere in the club changed. Slowly but surely, customers began to drift away. But for a time, the Double R Club had been at the heart of the East End nightlife. It weren't just a nightclub, it was an expression of the Krays' ambition, a stepping stone in their journey from local toughs to London's most notorious crime figures. Just down the road from the Double R was the Black Swan, another popular haunt of the Krays. They weren't content owning just one corner of the East End, they wanted to control all of it, and with each new venture, their influence only grew. As their reputation spread, so did their connections. Leslie Payne, a business-minded associate, helped the twins manage their finances and expand their operations in more sophisticated ways. Payne's involvement added a layer of legitimacy to the Krays' business ventures, though it also introduced new complications down the line. Next time, we'll take a look at how the Kray twins moved beyond the East End roots and stepped into the world of London's West End, and how they balance their newfound fame with their violent criminal enterprise. Thanks for joining London's Dark Archives. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like and subscribe and tune in next week for our next episode.